To use solder and heat shrink connections because I feel like those are the strongest and most resistant to the type of abuse that I put things through. I'm kind of hard on things, but figured I'd show you how I solder things, how I was taught by an old boy. Old boys seem to know their stuff. Anyway, I'll go through that. Before the soldering iron gets too hot, you need to make sure this is just a cheap soldering iron that I've had for many years. One thing you got to do is it just helps a lot to make sure the tip is good and shined up. Sometimes that residue of the flux and stuff from the solder gets caked on there, and then you don't get a good heat up when you go to solder. So do that before it gets too hot. It's starting to get warm, but just get a good scuffed up kind of shiny tip on it. I think this is 18 gauge wire. We're actually going to do one aluminum and one copper wire just to show you that that works. I usually strip off a good 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Okay, and then, oh, did I drop my wire? Oh, there it is. I got OD number 95 lead-free tinning flux. Flux helps a ton. Didn't used to use it, do now. Works really well. I just dip the wire in, each end of the wire into it. And it gets a little messy. And then we'll, with the flux on there, twist the wires together. You don't always have all this room. This is kind of a luxury, because I was underneath the truck doing it last night. Get a good spot where you can kind of prop your wire. I suppose it'd be best not to use the solder that I'm about to use to prop. Let's see, what can I prop with? Using a paint cup lid. You want to do what's called tinning, from what I remember. That's just getting a little bit of solder on the end of your soldering iron. That'll help the flow as well. I don't know if you can hear it sizzling, but it's getting hot. And then chase it around here. There we go. It's getting hot enough to where the solder melts right into it. And there you go. Now we'll heat shrink. I don't think this heat shrink is gonna shrink enough because I ran out of my smaller gauge stuff last night. Cut off enough to cover the area. You want to wipe off the flux that might have run onto your insulation. Slide it over where your connection is. It's also nice to use color-coded heat shrink. I just use a Flick of Flame. This one's pretty darn fancy, from Bass Pro Shops. I used to have a little turbo lighter that works great, because when you're outside doing it in the wind, the turbo lighter stays lit, whereas this doesn't. But you just run your flame along the edge of the heat shrink. Different heat shrink tapes have different qualities about them. Some of them have a glue inside. Some shrink further than others, a certain percentage of its original size. This one just isn't quite as small as it should be, but you see how it works. It shrunk around the joint, and you got a good strong vibration resistant, pull resistant. To me, it's the strongest type of wire joint you can make. So there you go. Hopefully you learned something. You can cheat a little bit. Let me show you a little cheat. Strip off. Let me quick grab another chunk of wire. I don't recommend this, but sometimes when you're in a bind, like underneath the truck or you're under a dash or something, it'll work a little better. And if you ask me, it's just as strong, just maybe not quite the proper way to do it. It's got everything fluxed up, twisted together. Say you just don't have the space to heat through the wire, I'll go ahead and get some solder melted onto the tip of the soldering iron and just kind of feed it when it gets hot enough. See, I'm touching it instead of heating through the wires. When your wires get hot enough, it'll pull that solder in as opposed to heating through the wires. I think it's just as strong. It may not be kosher to how they teach in electrician school, but works for me. Alright, hope you learned something. Thank you.